Hi, I'm Braden Lovis. I'm from Regina, Saskatchewan, and born in Canada, and still currently reside in Regina. Some languages that I've come across in Regina here, since that's the only place I've ever lived, is French and Cree. Those are languages that I've learned so far through my experience here. But just because I've only lived in Regina and born and raised in Canada and Regina, my family actually comes from a variety of different places. So on my mom's side, my great grandparents are actually from Russia, and on my dad's side, my great grandparents are actually from Hungary. So those are like my two main backgrounds that are also my cultures within my family. So for my social context within my family, we only speak English primarily. Like my grandparents will sometimes spitball some different Russian and Hungarian words, but even they and my parents, they're not really fluent in those languages, so all we primarily speak is English within my family. But within my community within Regina, which is Uplands, it's kind of a small community in the north end. There's all kinds of different people from different backgrounds that speak all kinds of different languages. So I do interact with people that do speak different languages, primarily Philippine and Chinese type of languages within my community that I've interacted with personally. But I do see all kinds of different languages being used within my community, just not within my family. So for me, my core 8 values and beliefs for language is that each language should hold cultural identity, different types of communication and connection. They should also have linguistic diversity, economic opportunities, social opportunities. It should also have a bit of social status and prestige, I believe, with some educational value as well as personal identity and expression. And then also, every language should have different types of language rights and justice within them, right? So, what I mean when I say cultural identity and keeping that is meaning that people should keep their language alive and keep their cultural identity through their language by preserving and celebrating their own native languages. Like, people should have that opportunity, right? So, that's what I believe. And then when I say communication and connection, languages should be like tools almost in a sense in your toolbox in terms of just communicating and connecting with other people within your communities. So when I say linguistic diversity, what I mean is that I personally promote communities with multilingual speakers in their society. I think that's a good thing, and I think that should be a thing. I think people should be allowed to speak their own languages within communities, their workplaces, and such like that. Like, I'm all for that. I don't think any place should just speak one language and that be forced upon them. And then when I say for economic opportunities, meaning like if you know multiple languages, you should have, more of a shot at getting a certain job or a certain career opportunity because in my opinion, that's a tool, that's not a con for you as a potential prospect for a job opportunity. So that's what I mean when I say those two things. As well, when I say social status and prestige, some people feel as if, like, say I'm in Canada or Saskatchewan, for example, the dominant language is primarily English and French. But if people don't speak those languages fluently, they get discriminated or marginalized because they don't speak those languages. Personally, I don't believe in that. I feel like everyone should be on an equal playing field in terms of languages. Like, I don't think any language should be above another, in my opinion. And then when I say educational value, what I mean is that, we should have these opportunities within our schools, which a lot of schools do now within Canada, where people can learn all kinds of different languages, whether that's Chinese or Cree or whatever languages you're interested in. There are options nowadays, and I'm all for that for people trying to learn different languages. And then lastly, when I say personal identity and expression, so what I mean is a lot of people, like, they have their own languages, right? Their own native language, right? So that's how they want to express their thoughts and emotions and creativity through that language. Like, I'm all for that. I think you should be able to do that. And then lastly, when I say language rights and justice, I believe that every language should have different rights and justice to keep these languages going, right? In order to protect the language and the linguistic diversity and equality within communities. So, as I mentioned before, my family's language is English, but we also know a little bit of French, Hungarian, and Russian. But again, as I mentioned before, just slightly, like I wouldn't say we're very fluent in any of those languages. I also know a little bit of Cree from university, but again, I wouldn't say I'm fluent in those languages. So the language policy that we follow, for my family anyway, is Canada's language policy, which is English and French. So when I think about the main factor and factors that have led to my current language profile, I guess the biggest thing is that I didn't really get to know my great grandparents as well, because again, they passed on before I could really remember and really get to know them and understand where they come from. So that's kind of the big thing for me. And then I guess my parents didn't, they didn't really bother to try to pick up a chunk of their Russian and Hungarian languages, because again, it just wasn't necessary for my parents, because it wasn't really like a family tradition, and everything was moved on to English or French in Canada. So that's the biggest reason why that's the case. And I guess the reason why my great grandparents did understand their languages so well is because they actually moved from those countries, and that was again the language policy within those countries, Russia and Hungary. So that's how they obviously knew their language, right? So I guess knowing languages is mostly, again, what's your language policy from where you're from. But also, again, nowadays you do have opportunities to pick up different languages. But before, mostly, again, it was just, what's your language policy? I need to learn that language type thing. That's how it generally is for most cultures. So just going off of that, what I've just said, I guess my family has experienced language loss just through deaths and not really needing the language, right, from being in Canada and Saskatchewan, right? So it wasn't a priority for my family just to pass on these different languages, right? So that was kind of the big thing. So I guess education does play a fact in that, because again, back in those days, right, like my parents weren't really learning a variety of different languages just besides English, really. Like my parents weren't even taught French. Now, though, in like my generation and the younger generations, we're being taught more in courses like this, and French schools, French immersion schools, different classes and such you can pick up. So I guess kind of everything played a factor in losing these languages, like the government, education systems, and just our culture in general. It's unfortunate. Like my parents never picked up a second language. Most people in my family, besides great grandparents, don't have any clue of a second language, can't speak anything else just besides English. It's sad, but it wasn't needed for them or required for them to go forward in with their lives in Canada, in Saskatchewan in particular. So that's kind of just the reality of, in my family anyway, the language loss that occurred.